I'm Pastor Shafer, the senior pastor here at Mount Olive Lutheran Church in Santa Monica, California, and this is Hope Matters. Each week we interview interesting people from around the USA and even around the world about the topic of hope, because we believe that hope matters. Our guest this week is a longtime friend of mine, Julie Aageson, who's now living in Portland, Oregon, and has a long career working in resource development for the Lutheran Church, and is a writer and author of numerous books. I even have her latest book right in front of me. Thanks to Julie sending it to me. And so, Julie, tell me about this latest book. I found it interesting that you, pre-COVID, wrote a book that seems very appropriate for this year.
Well, thanks, Eric. I'm really pleased to be with you, and thanks for the invitation. Yes, if you take a look at the epilogue for Finding Home, I wrote the epilogue because I think just a few days before all the sudden entrance of COVID into our lives, I had sent the manuscript off to the publisher, and I knew I needed to write something about this sea change that was no doubt going to affect all of us in ways that we could only imagine. I don't think anyone could have imagined what this would be like. And yet, through the entire book, which is on themes of what home might mean in various kinds of situations, there was, I think, a kind of foreboding to some extent. And I think that's probably true in the siblings to this book, Benedictions and Holy Ground, in part because these last several years have been filled with a lot of foreboding. And I don't know that that's necessarily unique to our time. I suspect it isn't, but it has been extraordinary nonetheless. And so while Finding Home is not necessarily a book about hope, each of the essays in it, I think, focuses on hope. And then I did this epilogue to say, who knows where we're going. Living through these last 4 years of political chaos and writing this book during this time was complicated. I was in despair much of the time. And I don't want to minimize the hopelessness that I think a lot of people are struggling with. And now, having seen the election take place, I think we're still walking on eggshells because we're not finished with this a group of people in the White House who have turned our country upside down. And then the kind of double pandemics of both COVID and racial injustice rearing its head again, and rightfully so. We've had a load to carry, and I think people are very weary. Hopeful, yes, and I'll say more about that. But I think each of these 3 books, Finding Home, and then, and its siblings, Benedictions, which is another Van Gogh on the front of the book. You can see Starry Night. And then the Alphabet of Prayer, which is called Holy Ground. You see that? About praying without words. Those 3 I consider siblings, and I can say more about that. But I wanted to say that the first project that I considered as I began this new stage of life came about through an invitation of Augsburg Fortress, now 1517 Media. Anyway, Augsburg Fortress and Liturgical Press. In honor of the 500th anniversary of the Reformation, those two kind of iconic, one Roman Catholic and the other Lutheran presses, came together to produce a resource that would honor the Reformation, but more importantly, serve as a conversation starter for lay people in Catholic and Lutheran parishes to talk about the things we share in common. And so 3 Lutherans were asked to participate and 3 Roman Catholics. And this is a little book done, it was published in 2015. So I finished my work for the ELCA in 2013, and then we worked on this book in 2014, and it was published in 2015. And it's really quite a lovely, small, very accessible book for conversation among Lutherans and Catholics about the things we share in common. Marty Stortz, who taught at Augsburg University in Minneapolis, and I spent some time last week talking with 2 publishers in Berlin, a meeting that Beth Lewis set up to discuss the process that we used for writing this book, which was great fun, called Book Sprints. And we spent a week together in southern Minnesota, the 6 of us. And it was quite a daunting task to come together with 5 other writers and myself. No big egos, no prima donnas, a sense of real humility about being asked to produce a resource that would bring hope and remembering to the body of Christ. And so that was my act as I began this new stage of life.
Wonderful. Well, you've already alluded to it, so let's talk a little bit about hope. You know, you've written about it some, so especially in these times, Julie, what brings you hope in your life?
Oh gosh, Eric, you know, just the act of writing is really an act of hope for me. And I think it has always been that. Even when one is not feeling hopeful, writing leads me to hope again and again. And a couple of weeks ago, I was invited to give the homily at St. Luke in Portland, not my parish, but I was asked if I would preach, which I don't do. I'm not a preacher, I'm a teacher, but I was happy to do it. And in preparing for that, the New Testament text for the day was from Thessalonians about not losing, paying attention, not losing hope, being what I have to think here a minute about the words. Staying sober, staying awake, being attentive. And I read that text and I thought, oh my gosh, you know, that's been our dilemma through the last several years, being so worn out by paying attention, staying sober, staying awake. But it was a good reminder. And as I was preparing to do this for St. Luke, which had to be recorded, of course, a letter came to Jim and to me from Brian Blunt, who is president of Union Presbyterian Seminary in Richmond. And I had met Brian a couple of times just after he became president in Richmond. Paul Edison Swift and I were working with a team of people at Union to find a way to establish ongoing support for the National Training Center for Resource Center directors. And I met Brian, this extraordinarily wise New Testament scholar, African-American, called to serve as president in Richmond, a Southern seminary to the core. Brian sent this letter out end of the summer, and it knocked my socks off. So I'd like to share a little bit of it because I shared it in this homily, and maybe because I had stayed awake, stayed alert, stayed sober, my spirits were especially low. And this is what Dr. Blunt had to say. When there is blood in the streets, when there is devastation in the land, buy property. He's referring to Jeremiah, of course, and Jerusalem and Judah are under siege, and the whole nation is in peril. They're a dead country, a dying country. But Blunt says, but God has a word that glimmers with hope, not cynicism, a word of hope and promise around the buying of property when there is blood in the streets. I live in Portland, Oregon. This summer was not a peaceful summer. This summer was not peaceful for all of those who bravely marched and demonstrated across our land. Don't sell, buy, God tells Jeremiah, and then reminds listeners that houses and fields and vineyards shall again be bought in this land. And he goes on to talk about restoration and renewal and resurrection. So I listened to these words of Brian Blunt, and this was to me the heart of what keeps me going and what keeps me hopeful. Perhaps God is speaking now, not through the pandemic, but in spite of it, not through racial injustice, but in spite of it. Because of it, perhaps now is the time to put our ears to biblical texts and discussions, to the movement of the Spirit, to listen for a word from the Lord. Now is not the time to opt out. Now is the time to buy in, to go all in into the darkness with the brightest light you can muster, with the most promising actions you can spiritually spark. The words you write, the voice you raise, the people you help, the causes you champion, the protests you voice, the challenges you construct, the witness you wreak. They are your way of allowing God to invest in hope and promise through you, just as God invested in hope and promise through Jeremiah. And, I write over and over and over again about being a God bearer, being a little Christ. And that is where I find hope, no matter how dark the days, no matter how fragile our democracy. That's the place, the deep well that I draw from.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much, Julie. Well, and thank you for talking to us today. So if people want to find this book and its siblings, as you said, I'm sure they can buy them on Amazon. Would you rather them go somewhere else?
People are welcome to contact me directly. My email is jaageson@cord.edu. I'm happy to send them out. they can be ordered from the publisher with in stock, but they are on Amazon. Yes, they are there as well. And again, the first one is Benedictions, 26 Reflections, Starry Night on the front. And then the second, Holy Ground, an Alphabet of Prayer, another Van Gogh on the front, and Finding Home. And if anyone is interested in One Hope, this little tome is a great tool for discussion. And each of the three that I wrote myself have a reflection that is a kind of kernel of the essay, and then some ideas to discuss. So they're really good tools for conversation. I'm going to be joining a couple of parishes after the first of the year to talk with them as they read Finding Home, and there'll be Zoom meetings, which I've done on occasion before, where people want to hear me read from a section or answer questions about why I wrote what I did.
But
So,
having read this one recently, it's not just for small groups. It certainly could be an individual time of reflection and even devotion with the questions you ask at the end of the chapters.
absolutely, yeah. It's all three books are intended for meditation and individual use. They're not only to be used in a group. I was going to say about Holy Ground that I included these beautiful, this is the Alphabet of Prayer book. And William Morris designed all these gorgeous textiles. He was an arts and crafts founder, I think, of the arts and crafts movement. But each chapter begins with the letter of the alphabet in with his beautiful design, which for a while I gave out packages of colored pencils as a way for individuals to meditate, to color in this beautiful calligraphy letter as they meditated on attention, beauty, compassion, devotion, da 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 da.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. And thank you for being with us this week, Julie, on Hope Matters. This is Hope Matters, a production of Mount Olive Lutheran Church here in Santa Monica, California. Our guest this week has been Julie Aageson, a writer, author, and resource specialist, and longtime friend of mine. And I'm Pastor Shafer. We're so glad you've joined us this week on Hope Matters. We believe that hope matters, and we believe we have a God of hope. Thank you for being with us. Stop recording.